Good morning and welcome to Talks at Google in Cambridge, Mass. Today it is my great pleasure to introduce Marc Abrahams. It's not every day that we get to welcome the man the Washington Post has called the nation's guru of academic grunge, who's also a manga hero, but here we are. Marc's CV is far too long to list here, but we know and love him as co-founder and editor of the Annals of Improbable Research, and the author of This Is Improbable, and the book which we're expecting imminently, This Is Improbable Too, not to mention co-author of the Ig Nobel Cookbook Volume 1, which frankly sounds terrifying. And of course, he's the founder and MC of the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony. Little known fact, he's married to psychologist Robin Abrams, who writes the misconduct advice column in the Sunday Boston Globe magazine. I love that column, maybe you do too. If any of you has a friend who has a personal problem or a social issue, I'm told that Robin would welcome your input. All the questions that come to the column are from readers, and she's always looking for those. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Marc Abrahams.
Thank you, John. Thanks very much, John. My name is Marc Abrahams. I'm editor of this magazine. It's called the Annals of Improbable Research. Some of you are very familiar with it. Some of you probably have never heard of it and are even on the verge of being offended at what it might be. I'll distribute a couple copies in our most traditional manner here. I've got a couple more later on if anybody would like some. I collect things. I collect research, and I define that in the broadest possible way. I collect research that makes people laugh and then think. These are real things that are documented that when you first encounter them are funny. There's something about them that just is funny. But also there's something about them that a week later you find it's still rattling around in your head, the kind of thing that you want to tell your friends about and argue about. So if it has both qualities, it makes people laugh and then think, I want to get a hold of it, put it in our magazine. I also write a newspaper column in one of the British newspapers with similar things, and I write other places. And then every year we give prizes, and that's mostly what I'm going to show you about here. This research, I hope you will agree, deserves to get some kind of prize. Let me show you another. This is a piece of a patent that was granted in 1965 to George and Charlotte Blonsky. The Blonskys were a married couple. They lived in New York City at the time. They invented what they call a device to assist women in giving birth. This is what it looks like. It's a large, round table with some machinery underneath. When the woman is ready to deliver her child, she lies on her back on the table. They strap her down to the table, and then the table is rotated at high speed, and the child comes flying out through centrifugal force. If you look closely at this engineering diagram, you may decide that there is at least one suboptimal thing in the design. I would point you especially toward the part of it that's designed to catch the child when it emerges. You may feel that that's not quite adequate to the task, what they've got there. And I'll show you a third thing here. This is a biology paper. It was published in a biology journal in the Netherlands. And it is the first scientifically documented case of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard duck. This won an Ig Nobel Prize for this. This was completely unknown to ornithologists when it happened. So each of those things I just told you a little bit about has been awarded an Ig Nobel Prize. And the prizes have that same criterion that I described. It's, if we've chosen well on these things, each of them makes people laugh and then think. We have been doing this every year since 1991. We just had the 24th first annual Ig Nobel Prize ceremony 2 weeks ago. So you work with at least one person who is vital to our let's call it an enterprise. Quentin Smith, who I think some of you know, has been our broadcast engineer on the webcast for the past 6 or 7 years. When he began, he was an undergrad at MIT. And we've been webcasting that ceremony since 1995. We were, I'm pretty sure, one of the very first things ever to webcast anything. Robert T. Morris, who some of you know that name, was our first broadcast engineer. Yeah, he was also, I believe, the first person convicted on federal charges of doing something that caused the entire internet to collapse. It was not something he was trying to do. He's a very nice guy. We have a nice history of good and interesting engineers. I'll tell you a little about the Ig Nobel Prizes. First of all, this word hiccups. You may see it repeated here. I hope you do. Otherwise you have maybe some kind of problem not related to hiccups. But hiccups, hiccups, hiccups. There is a form of hiccups that lasts a long time, not just for a few minutes or a few hours, but it goes on for days, weeks, and months. It's rare, but it does happen. The medical profession calls it intractable hiccups. They have names, nice official names, for pretty much anything you can imagine, and lots of things you probably couldn't imagine. Doctors have never known how to treat intractable hiccups. They've tried lots of things. Finally, a few years ago, a doctor in Tennessee, came up with what seems to be a reliable cure for intractable hiccups. He tried it, and he published a medical report. Here it is. He calls it termination of intractable hiccups with digital rectal massage. And are there any questions about any of the technical terms that I'm using here? Francis Fesmire is the doctor who did this. We awarded him an Ig Nobel Prize in medicine for this. Here he is giving his acceptance speech at the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony. Since that time, other doctors have seen his report, other doctors who had similar patients that they were trying to treat, and they have tried his method, and so far every case we've heard about, small number of cases, but every one we've heard about, the method has worked reliably. Now, I have some unhappy, some very sad news to report. Dr. Fesmire died a few months ago unexpectedly. He worked at a large medical center in Tennessee, and we've seen the obituaries, and his colleagues are very sad. He was obviously a beloved in many ways man. And I'd gotten to know him fairly well. He liked to come back every few years to the Ig Nobel ceremony and do what you see here. And he told me that one of his dreams was that someday he would be able to travel around with me, especially when I go to Europe and do events with some of the Ig Nobel Prize winners, that he would come along and he'd be able to explain his technique to people around the world as part of an Ig Nobel event. But he died, and that's never going to happen. So I would like to ask a little favor, even though you don't know me and I don't know you. Would you please join me just for a moment in a small tribute to Dr. Fesmire? Could you raise a finger in honor of Dr. Fesmire? Thank you. Thank you. All right. So this, again, is their criterion for things, and it's just this. It's got to be real, and it's got to make people laugh, people anywhere, people who aren't familiar with it at all. If it's going to win an Ig Nobel Prize, make people laugh and then think. We get something like 9,000 new nominations every year, and we as a lot of us, mostly volunteers, are always looking for things too, but we get floods of things, little floods coming in every day. And we give just 10 prizes a year, and they're not necessarily restricted to recent things. We can by our own rules, go back up to about 50 years or so. As long as there's somebody still alive who knew the person and could come and talk about that, then it's okay to give that a prize. The oldest we've ever given, or the farthest back we went, was about 15 years ago. We gave a prize to the 3 people who were responsible for naming Murphy's Law. You know Murphy's Law, that great engineering principle that if something can go wrong, it will. And that was born in an engineering project that happened at Edwards Air Force Base, which had a slightly different name back in the late 1940s. An incident that happened there, and it involved Captain Murphy of the U.S. Army Air Corps, whose name ended up in Murphy's Law, and several other people. Murphy's son came to our ceremony. One of the co-winners was the leader of the project in which led to the birth of the name Murphy's Law. And it's somebody who hated Murphy. And it's somebody who devoted the rest of his life to trying to convince the world that Murphy gets too much credit for Murphy's Law. All right. If you win an Ig Nobel Prize, first of all, before I explain this, in most cases, we will get in touch quietly and offer the prize. And if somebody declines the honor, if somebody says no, that's fine, and that's the end of it, and we never tell anybody. Happily for us, almost everybody who's offered an Ig Nobel Prize decides to accept. And here's what they get. They get an Ig Nobel Prize. That's what you're looking at here. It's a different design every year. They're always made of extremely cheap materials. This is from last year, 2013, and the design that year was a frame with a glass front, and under the glass there was a hammer and an indication there, a statement, in case of emergency, use hammer to break glass. So you get that. You also get a piece of paper that says you've won an Ig Nobel Prize, and the piece of paper is signed by several people who have Nobel Prizes. So it's a nice piece of paper. And there is a tradition that a lot of the winners follow, and they seem to keep inventing it independently too, that they'll take this piece of paper home with them to whatever country they'd come from to come to the ceremony, and put it in a nice frame, and then hang it in their home right above the toilet. We don't have any money, so we can't offer cash, alas, to the winners, just because we don't have cash to offer. But we did finally figure out a way, even on that we could overcome that limitation. This past year, each of the winners received $10 trillion. Each of the winners, each of the winning teams, received a $10 trillion bill from Zimbabwe. You may remember Zimbabwe had a little incident, lasted about 1.5 years with inflation. By the end of it, they were printing bills with a face value of $100 million. The government official in Zimbabwe responsible for doing that was awarded an Ig Nobel Prize. He, at the same time, was having the government print some bills that had a face value of $100 trillion and other bills that had a face value of 1 cent. And he published a book to explain to the public in Zimbabwe and the rest of the world why he was doing this. And he said that when you're spending these large amounts of money, you still have to make change. If you win and decide to accept the prize, the other thing you get is an invitation to join us at the Ig Nobel Prize ceremony. This happens in the building you're seeing. That's Sanders Theater, which is about 2 miles down the road here at Harvard. It's the oldest and biggest meeting place at Harvard. It fits 1,100 people. It's always completely jammed up on Ig Nobel night. The tickets sell out very quickly. And as I mentioned before, we webcast it live. Have been doing that for a long time. And you can see videos of many of the past ceremonies on our website, improbable.com. The very best thing about that is you get to see these people. And you get to see the heart of the matter, too. The winners are kept very secret until we introduce them on stage. They come, many of them, from quite literally around the world, and at their own expense. we defray it with the $10 trillion bill, but that's all we can do. And when we introduce each of them, they step out through a curtain, and waiting to greet them is a Nobel laureate who will shake their hand and hand them their Ig Nobel Prize. And one of my colleagues is with me today, one of the people who helps all of that work on stage, Eliza Kasoy. Eliza, if you wouldn't mind standing and taking a bow. A curtsy, a bow, whatever. Okay. So Eliza is one of the people who is in charge of making sure that the winners and the famous scientists and all don't panic on stage, that they have every reason to feel comfortable and in good hands, and that they have a good time and will go where they're supposed to go without having to worry about that. And it usually works out just fine. Here's a little, this year's prizes were 2 weeks ago. I haven't had too much chance to do a proper gathering of materials from that. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit of what happened there, and then I'll show you a little more detail about the prizes we gave out last year. This is a little piece of video from 2 weeks ago from the ceremony. This will show you one of the winners finishing his acceptance speech. And it will also show you the method that we invented to ensure that speeches are kept fairly brief. This winner is from the Czech Republic. He and his colleagues shared a prize, an Ig Nobel Prize, with another team that's based in the US and India. And the two of them each were awarded because they were gathering evidence to answer the question, is it mentally hazardous to own a cat? So here is Jaroslav Fleger.
The attention of both the general and scientific public, our discovery of RH arch.
Please stop.
Therefore, and especially my really important discovery, the theory of frozen evolution. Therefore, thank you, IG committee, you general public, and you Toxoplasma, very, very much.
Please stop. I'm bored.
We came up with that device 13 years ago, and the first year we did that, the entire Ig Nobel ceremony was 1 hour shorter than it had been the year before. And every year we have kept pretty close to finishing on time, mostly thanks to that device. Here's a quick look at the winners that we gave out last year. The medicine prize was awarded to a team from Japan, China, and the US for assessing the effects of listening to opera on heart transplant patients who are mice. They describe their work in this paper, auditory stimulation of opera music induced prolongation, you can look, all of the things I'm showing you, you can easily obtain copies, or if you can't, email me and I'll send you a copy. On our website, on improbable.com, there's one page that lists all of the winners going back to the very beginning with links to most of their work and all that. It's usually worth looking at the work because we're just giving you a little tiny summary. Often the details are far better. And most of these people have done a lot of other things, and most of them who are still alive are still working on things. And you know from your own experience with your colleagues, and most of you quite probably with yourself, people can be very clever, and they don't always trumpet the news of the best and worst things that they've done. So follow some links if you like. Here is that team. They flew in from Japan. We were not exactly aware that they planned to show up wearing mouse costumes. And we were not at all aware that they planned to then sing their speech in the form of an opera solo. The Ig Nobel Prize for Psychology went to a large team from France, the US, the UK, the Netherlands, and Poland. they confirmed by experiment that people who think they are drunk also think they are attractive. This is their paper with the title, "Beauty is in the Eye of the Beer Holder. People who think they are drunk also think they are attractive." This experiment was done in France. So it's not firmly known that this effect happens outside of France, but they believe it does. And here's that team at the moment that they were awarded the prize, and it's being handed to them right here. And then they too showed up planning to sing their acceptance speech, which they did. You can see this, the Miss Sweetie Poo, that's what we call our device. She's a charming 8-year-old child who happens to have ice water in her veins. We choose very carefully, and we need, since they tend to grow up, we need to get a new Miss Sweetie Poo every year or two. This is Miss Sweetie Poo from last year. We gave a prize in the field of safety engineering. Went to Gustavo Pizzo, the late Gustavo Pizzo, who lived in New York City. He won for inventing, in about 1972, he invented an electromechanical system to trap airplane hijackers. Mr. Pizzo's system worked by dropping a hijacker through trap doors inside the plane. And then there was some machinery that would seal the hijacker up into a package. That package would then drop through the airplane's specially installed bomb bay doors and would be parachuted to Earth, where police, who were alerted by radio, would await the arrival of this packaged hijacker by parachute. This is the patent that Mr. Pizzo has. And you can see more of his device and his thinking if you look up the patent. As far as we know, this was never adopted by any of the major airlines, at least partially because it's very expensive to refit an airplane to have all these bomb bay doors and hijacker encapsulation devices and trap doors and other things. The Ig Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded to a team from Italy, Russia, and several other countries. The work was mostly done in Italy. They discovered that some people would be physically capable of running across the surface of a pond if those people and that pond were on the moon. Here's their paper about it called "Humans Running in Place on Water at Simulated Reduced Gravity." It's published in PLOS One, a very good journal. Many of the things that have won Ig Nobel Prizes have been published in top journals. Many have been published in bottom journals, and many not published at all. By the way, it's not just science. We can give give Ig Nobel Prizes in pretty much anything. Most years we give out a peace prize. We, a couple of times, have given out an art prize. The first time we gave out an Ig Nobel Prize in art, it went to a man named Don Featherstone. He's the creator of the plastic pink flamingo. And if you'd come to the Ig Nobel ceremony, you could have met him. This is some of the work done about. What they were trying to figure out was if you were to somehow make the force of gravity weaker on Earth, how much weaker would it have to be before an ordinary person could walk across the surface of water? There are some animals that can do that. There are a few lizards and some insects that are able to walk across the surface of water, but not many. And as it worked out in the calculations, and then when they did some experiments, it turned out that the surface of the moon just happens to be right at the level where if there were water there and you could walk and breathe and all, you could walk across that surface. Here's a little video they gave us of how they did that research. Thanks. Being here at Google, I imagine you have dozens of labs filled with people doing things like this, spread across 100 different countries. But maybe that's just my desire. And here is part of the team, flew in from Italy to accept the prize, and you can see them here finishing up their acceptance speech. We gave a prize in the field of archaeology. Went to a team from Canada and the US. They were awarded their prize for parboiling a dead shrew. A shrew, you probably know, is a small animal about the size of a mouse, and it looks fairly like a mouse. They parboiled a dead shrew and then swallowed that shrew without chewing it. They were careful not to chew it. And then they carefully examined everything excreted by the test subject who ate that during the next several days. They did this so they could see which bones would dissolve inside the human digestive system and which bones would not. They published a paper on it. The paper is called Human Digestive Effects on a Micromammalian Skeleton. It's got details and photographs of the work. And they got a big surprise. They had expected that the smallest bones, many of them would be dissolved, and some of the medium-sized bones might suffer some damage from the digestive juices, and that the big bones would be largely intact. That's not what happened. What happened was even the biggest bones were substantially dissolved. And they were kind of shocked to see this. This was completely against anybody's expectation. They don't discuss it too much in the paper, but this also could be a very shocking thing to an awful lot of people who are archaeologists, because there are an awful lot of papers that have been published for decades interpreting collections of bones, typically of some small animal and some large animal in the same place, where it seems evident that the large animal ate the small animal. And an awful lot of the explanation that our archaeologists came up with had to do with, because there are only these bones left and these ones are damaged, the large animal must have had massive jaws and certain kind of teeth. This paper says that not necessarily so. So it might be kind of interesting over the next few years to see if this gets noticed in the archaeology community. This is the winner. At the moment he was introduced, you can see Eliza Kasoy there helping to shepherd him through the sacred curtain. And if you'd like to shake her hand and try to bribe her later, I'm sure Eliza wouldn't mind shaking your hand and trying to be bribed. For the next one, the next prize that I'm going to describe, if you are tempted to, for any reason, to applaud this achievement, please do not. Please just hold your applause on this one, no matter how much you approve or whatever of what this person did. The Ig Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Alexander Lukashenko, the president of the country of Belarus. He won the Ig Nobel Peace Prize for making it illegal to applaud in public. He shared the Peace Prize with the Belarus State Police, who arrested a one-armed man for applauding. Here are some of President Lukashenko's press clippings from around the world. We gave a prize in the field of probability. That Ig Nobel Prize was awarded to a team from the UK, the Netherlands, and Canada. They're based in Edinburgh, in Scotland. They won for making two related discoveries. First, that the longer a cow has been lying down, the more likely that cow will soon stand up. And second, that once a cow stands up, you cannot easily predict how soon the cow will lie down again. They published a paper called "Are Cows More Likely to Lie Down the Longer They Stand?" This is, they sent us this photo of the research. And this is Bert Tolkamp, one of the researchers who flew from Edinburgh to Cambridge here to hastily finish up his acceptance speech, as you can see. And the Ig Nobel Prize for Public Health was awarded to a large team of doctors in Thailand. They're all based at the same hospital in the city of Bangkok, Thailand. They were honored for the medical techniques they described in a report they published. Their report is called "Surgical Management of an Epidemic of Penile Amputations in Siam." Okay, surgical management of an epidemic of penile amputations in Siam. They were honored for those techniques which they recommend, except in cases where the amputated penis has been partially eaten by a duck. Here is the beginning of their paper, which, as you can see, sure enough, is called Surgical Management of an Epidemic of Penile Amputations in Siam. I would be happy to explain the duck part if you like, and if you already know, that's fine, and I won't waste your time. Anybody? All right. There's always one person who somehow has not heard the details. As they explain, I think lovingly in this paper, for the benefit of readers outside Thailand, in Thailand, many people live in houses that are built on stilts. And many of those houses, underneath the house, the family keeps the farm animals, chickens, ducks, whatever. There was, during the 1970s, a true epidemic. Apparently, the first one or two were publicized heavily in the newspapers, and this somehow led to many other people doing it, of angry wives severing their husband's penis, usually after the husband had done much provoking of some sort. The wife would sever the penis and then sometimes throw it out the window. And occasionally, the severed penis, in its journey outside the window, would land down amidst the farm animals, which wasn't necessarily a terrible problem as far as the surgeons were concerned. They were usually able to reattach the pieces and get everything working, except, they said, in cases where the piece of meat had been chewed by a duck. So was that clear? Thanks. All right, so that's a quick look at last year's Ig Nobel Prize winners, and we're starting to prepare for next year's, which will be the 25th first annual Ig Nobel Prize ceremony. And I have collected a bunch of things I've written, much of these writings stemming from things that I did in the newspaper column in The Guardian, in this lovely and delightful book, which has just come out, called Is Improbable Too. And I had a previous collection called This Is Improbable, thus the two. It got some nice reviews. It came out in England a few months ago, and it's come out here in the US just now. And in England, it got one review that I especially am proud of. It was a very long review, and if you write a book, you're always grateful when you get a long review, because there's not that much space in newspapers. This was in the biggest of the London newspapers, the Daily Mail, which you may know has a peculiar attitude towards scientists and technology and many other things. But they gave it a long review, and what I'm proud of is that they summed up the book in the midst of that review in this phrase. They said that this book is almost dementedly inconsequential. So I hope you enjoy the book and the other things I'll be writing about. I've brought a couple other issues of the magazine for you, too. Should I distribute them the same way? Yeah, okay. This direction and over here. Okay. Normally we do distribute them through the mail or also in the form of ebooks. And I should mention, we became one of the first magazines to publish also in the form of ebooks, not just paper. And we did it with some assistance from you guys, which I want to thank you for. Specifically, Dave Fulser was very, very helpful. When we were trying to overcome some of the limitations that Amazon, for some reason, put into ebooks, making it nearly impossible to have nicely formatted documents in the form of ebooks that could be sold by ebook vendors, I was looking around for several years trying to find other publishers who were trying to find a way to solve that problem. And one of the few people I found, and one of the few groups I found that had been working on the same problem was here at Google, Dave Fulser and his gang. So they were tremendously helpful to us in coming up with this new way. And if you see Dave in the halls, please pass on my hello and thanks. That's another picture of another issue of the magazine. One issue every year is a special issue devoted to the Ig Nobel winners. So the opera mouse researchers ended up on the cover. I want to finish with one other little piece of video from the ceremony a couple weeks ago. And I'll introduce it because it too has a connection to you. You may recognize this man, Ray Kurzweil, who Ray's title is, I think, Director of Engineering, something like that. And I worked for Ray a long time ago, back at Ray's first company, Kurzweil Computer Products. I was a programmer. We were working on optical character recognition things and a machine that printed things aloud for blind people and other related stuff. But Ray has many sides, as you may know, and one of them has to do with nutrition. That Ray, for decades, has been working on ideas about people stopping, for the most part, eating what they're eating now and having a diet heavily based on hundreds of carefully selected pills. And he believes and has written extensively that if you follow the diet properly, you stand a good chance of living for perhaps many hundreds of years, maybe even beyond that. So every year in our, well, not so at that point, every year in the Ig Nobel ceremony, the heart of it is when we introduce the 10 Ig Nobel winners. But between those announcements, we do other things. And one of the things we do, the grandest thing we do, is every year we write a little opera about something in science. We steal music from dead composers, Mozart this year, and we write a story and lyrics that explain or don't explain something going on now in science and technology. This year, it was about, I took the idea of Ray or somebody subsisting on nothing but pills, and I twisted that and extended it way off into other directions. And I told Ray and invited him to the ceremony too, although he didn't come. And what I'm going to show you is the very end of the opera, the last minute or so of the opera. The plot, it's two people, it's two wealthy entrepreneurs who follow the idea, the same one Ray did. They stop eating regular food and they decide to get all of their nourishment entirely from hundreds and hundreds of pills. And they are very greedy people in this opera. So this is very fictional people. They're very greedy people, and they end up buying all the farmland in the world because they want to ensure that they're going to survive. They do. They after 600 years, they're still around, but there are no other people. It's just them and their microbes. And then something goes wrong. All of their pills have been stored in their basement, and they've neglected their plumbing. And the plumbing broke and flooded the basement. All of their pills, all their food supply is gone. And they have no skills about raising food or making pills. So they're doomed, and they know it. What you're going to see is the last minute or so of the opera, when they know they're doomed, they're still desperately trying to think of some way to survive. And their microbes, who you will see as a chorus all around them, are not at all unhappy because their microbes are probably going to survive. So you're going to see the two people doomed, panicked, and their microbes, a chorus of microbes, which includes 4 people who have Nobel Prizes, who were kind enough to let us stick them in the chorus, all coming together in this glorious conclusion to the opera. The opera is called What's Eating You?
Microbes are eating our insides. We have always prayed you. Oh, we have always prayed.
I have always prayed.
I have always
I have always prayed.
Give me
Oh,
your hand.
please give me your hand.
Give me
Oh,
your hand.
please, oh, please give me your hand.
I love you, love you, chum.
Little chum,
We love you, give me your hand, my sweetie sweet. What's eating you, my treat? Sweet.
what's eating
What's
you?
eating?
What's
Eating
eating
you. You.
you?
Ta-da! So if you happen to run into Ray, you might say hi and offer him some lunch or something. So that's everything I brought to show you. I want to thank you for inviting me, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. So thanks.
What caused you to decide to do all this?
What caused me to decide to do all this? I was a peculiar little kid, and most of the pieces of what I'm doing now, I was doing as a little kid. I like to read lots of science stuff, and I like to write what I thought were funny things. And I also, very early on, started reading newspapers, and I especially liked the odd little stories that I would see tucked away in the corners of pages. Because newspapers have always had before the internet where space stopped mattering so much, they always had the problem that you have to fill the page. And if you got a corner, you fill it with something short. And if you had a taste for that, you could notice that newspapers all the time would have these odd little stories that were very short and memorable to me. So I used to cut those out and collect those, and I'm still sort of doing that. And then I went off and studied math and got involved with computer stuff and was doing that because I didn't think as a grown-up you could get paid or make a living doing this other stuff. But I kept doing it and just giving it to a couple of friends, writing things, collecting things. And then one day, by this time I had started a little software company of my own, but one day I just started wondering, could I get some of my stuff published someplace? If I send it into some journal, can I get something published? So I sent some of my stuff off to a journal with a little cover letter, and a few weeks later I got a phone call from somebody saying, hi, I'm the publisher of the journal, got your articles, would you be the editor of the journal? So I went and talked to him, and I couldn't resist this. This was the chance to do all this. And there was a long history leading up to then. That journal had been started by a couple of scientists in the 1950s and had gone through tremendous highs and lows and been kind of wrecked, been bought by a big British science publisher just at this time. So it was a kind of happy conjunction. And so I started doing that at night. For the next 4 years, I was running my little software company, doing this at night. I started the Ig Nobel ceremony, and all kinds of mostly good things, and many wonderful things happen. And I've been very happy, and it's been growing and infecting the world. And now we have a big gang of people all around the world who seem to devote, I think, in some cases, maybe too much of their lives to being part of this. But I'm very happy at the way it's working out. And I invite all of you to be part of this. If you run across something that you think people should know about, just something that makes you laugh and makes you think, then the favor I ask of you, in addition to thank you for the favor you granted of celebrating Dr. Fesmire, is that next time you run across something that really hits you that way, after you tell your 3 best friends about it, if you want the rest of the world to know, just drop me a line. And I always give people credit for discovering it unless they don't want it. If you want your name to not appear, that's absolutely fine. And just say something. So, any other questions?
So I find what you're doing to be pretty hilarious. That said, there's kind of a view or culture right now where it's sort of anti-science, and a lot of views that research funding is a waste in science. Do you have any thoughts about if this impacts that either way?
Oh, yes. When we started doing this stuff, a lot of people assumed, and we still do, people new to it will assume from the name or something else, that we must be out to trash scientists and technology and medicine and all that stuff. And no, not at all. What we're about, at least what I think we're about, is trying to tempt people into being a little more curious about things. And also, maybe to my grand ambition, to get people a little more in the habit of when you hear something, when somebody important tells you something, this is great, this is wonderful, this discovery, or that that medicine is bad, or that video games are better, whatever, or this person is terrible, that when some important person tells you something, you can accept that if you want, but you can also look at it and make your own decision. So the general thing that I really love, and I hope this is what is at work here, is things that are right on the edge where at first glance it's not possible for anybody at first glance to know whether this is a good or a bad thing, or valuable or worthless. It's just not possible. You have to look into it in more detail, and then it may not be possible even then. It may play out over years. So trying to sort of promote things in both ends. For bad stuff, yeah, I would love people to look harder at the bad stuff and realize it's bad. But on the other end, I really want people to look at everything else and think that what you're looking at, you may be laughing at it, but that may turn out to be something you decide is one of the best parts of your life a few years from now. So don't be hasty in making those judgments. So it's a tough kind of, and maybe a crazy thing to want to do, but that's what I want to do, and that's what we're doing. So did that answer the question? Thanks. Okay. Well, I won't keep you from lunch and whatever. Again, thank you very, very much for inviting me. I feel very honored and very proud and happy to be here. Thank you.